A homeless German shepherd jumps into a couple's car and refuses to leave. What happens next will bring you to tears. Welcome back to Meaningful Stories. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and start the story right now. The city pulsed with restless energy as Emily gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles whitening under the strain. The streets were a chaotic symphony of blaring horns and impatient engines, bathed in the molten glow of a setting sun that bled crimson across the towering glass spires. The air was thick with exhaust and tension, a suffocating shroud over the urban sprawl. Beside her, Jake slouched in the passenger seat, one leg propped lazily against the dashboard, his thumb flicking across his phone screen while a faint hum escaped his lips, syncing with the radio's soft melody, a fragile thread of calm in the storm outside. They just veered onto a quieter street, the clamor fading into an eerie stillness, when chaos erupted. A shadow exploded from the sidewalk, a streak of fur and desperation slicing through the dusk like a bullet. Before Emily could scream, a violent thud rocked the car as something crashed through the open rear window, landing with a breathless thud on the back seat. Tires screeched as she slammed the brakes, her heart hammering like a war drum. Jake jolted upright, his phone clattering to the floor as he twisted around, voice cracking. What the hell was that? In the dimming light, they saw it, a German shepherd, its body a skeletal frame wrapped in filthy, matted fur, ribs jutting out like jagged cliffs beneath a threadbare coat, its ears flattened against its skull, tail tucked so tight it vanished, and its eyes, wide, wild, and glistening with terror, locked onto them as if they were its last lifeline. It shrank into the corner of the seat, trembling violently, each shallow breath a jagged gasp that echoed with raw panic. Jake fumbled for the door handle, muttering, "Okay, let's get you out, buddy." But the dog recoiled with a guttural whimper, not a growl of aggression, but a plea born from a deep, unspeakable wound. Emily's breath hitched, her pulse racing. This wasn't just a stray. This was a fugitive, fleeing something monstrous. And out of every car on that endless street, it had hurled itself into theirs, a desperate leap toward salvation. Or perhaps a final cry for mercy. The car's interior was a dim cave, swallowed by the creeping dusk, filled only with the ragged, desperate panting of the skeletal German shepherd huddled in the backseat. Named Tyson later, it wasn't a dog anymore, it was a trembling specter, its ribs clawing through its thin skin like the bars of a rusted cage, its matted fur reeking of damp earth and despair. Its eyes, wide and glistening with unshed tears, flickered like dying embers in a storm, locked onto Emily and Jake with a silent, gut-wrenching plea. Emily's breath snagged in her throat as she turned to face it, her voice a shaky whisper. "Why us? Jake? Out of everyone, why did it pick us?" Jake shifted uneasily in the passenger seat, his hands clenched into fists, as if grappling with the chaos that had just crashed into their lives. "We can't keep it, Em," he snapped, his gaze darting to the empty street beyond, half expecting a shadowy figure to emerge from the gloom, hunting for their unexpected stowaway. What if it belongs to someone? What if they're out there looking? Emily's head whipped side to side, her tangled hair sticking to her sweat-damp forehead. "Look at it, Jake. Does this look like a dog someone's missing? This is a creature running from hell itself." Her words erupted, raw with fury and pity, slicing through the stifling air. Tyson didn't stir, only shrank deeper into the seat's corner, its tail coiled tight like a noose, as if bracing for an invisible blow. Jake's jaw tightened as he rummaged through the glove compartment, fishing out a crumpled granola bar. With trembling fingers, he tore it open, breaking off a tiny piece and extending it toward Tyson. "Hey, buddy, you've gotta be starving," he murmured, voice thick with unease. Tyson's nose twitched, catching the scent, but it recoiled, eyes darting frantically as if the offer were a venomous trap. Emily's chest constricted. Hunger wasn't the issue. Trust was a luxury this dog could no longer afford. She peered out the window, the street stretching silent and desolate, a graveyard of shadows with no hint of pursuit. Yet a chill snaked up her spine. Tyson wasn't fleeing starvation alone, something sinister, something merciless, had driven it here. "We're not leaving it, Jake," she declared, her voice steel hard, fingers digging into the steering wheel until her knuckles blanched. "Just one night, we owe it that much." Jake exhaled sharply, his eyes flickering between Tyson's haunted stare and Emily's fierce resolve. Then nodded reluctantly. "Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you if this goes sideways." The engine roared to life, headlights slashing through the darkness, carving a path homeward. Tyson remained statue still, but its gaze clung to them, not with hope, but with the weary surrender of a soul that had lost everything. Clinging to the fragile lifeline they now offered, the night swallowed the car whole as Emily guided it down the winding road home. The headlights slicing through the pitch-black void, casting fleeting shadows on skeletal trees that clawed at the sky. In the backseat, Tyson lay like a living relic of torment, his shallow, jagged breaths cutting through the silence like the gasps of a drowning soul. His eyes, twin pools of raw, unfiltered dread, bore into the seats ahead, wide and unblinking, as if expecting some unseen predator to lunge from the darkness and drag him back to whatever hell he'd fled. Emily's grip on the wheel tightened, her pulse racing, not just from the weight of his presence, but from the gnawing certainty that they'd stumbled into something far darker than a lost stray. Pulling into the driveway, Jake flung open his door, the porch light spilling over his face, etching lines of tension into his features. "All right, little guy, time to come out," he said, forcing a steadiness into his voice. Though his outstretched hand trembled as it neared Tyson, the dog flinched violently, a sharp, keening whimper ripping from its throat, a sound like glass shattering underfoot. Jake yanked his hand back, his breath catching. "It thinks I'm going to hurt it," he muttered, his voice thick with unease, eyes darkening with realization. Emily dropped to her knees beside the open door, her shaky fingers digging into a grocery bag to retrieve a scrap of leftover chicken, its faint scent curling into the frigid air. "Hey, Tyson, it's okay. You're starving, aren't you?" she cooed, her voice a fragile lifeline tossed into the abyss. Tyson's nose twitched, his ears flicking faintly, but his body remained rigid, locked in a prison of fear. His gaze darted to the chicken, then to Emily, a tortured, flickering stare, torn between ravenous hunger and the ghosts of past cruelty. The moment stretched taut, the only sounds the mournful howl of the wind and the trio's uneven breathing. Then, agonizingly slow, Tyson edged forward, each muscle quivering as if it might snap, until his lips hesitantly closed around the morsel in Emily's palm. A choked sob caught in her throat, not for the act itself, but for the way his eyes met hers afterward, a glimmer of something broken yet yearning, as if she'd just become his first fragile anchor in a sea of terror. Seizing the chance, Jake draped an old blanket over Tyson, his movements swift yet tender as he scooped the dog from the seat. Tyson didn't fight, but his frame stiffened, brittle as if one wrong touch could shatter him. Emily bolted ahead, wrenching the front door open, warmth flooding out to clash with the biting cold. Jake eased Tyson onto the floor near the couch, but the dog didn't sniff or explore. He collapsed onto the blanket, curling into a tight, trembling ball, as if trying to erase himself from existence. Emily knelt beside him, her voice quaking. "You're safe now, Tyson. No one's going to hurt you." His ears twitched faintly, but his stare remained fixed on nothingness, a silent testament to a trust he couldn't yet afford to give. Morning light clawed its way through the curtains, spilling faint golden streaks across the wooden floor. Yet the room simmered with an unspoken tension. Thick as fog, Tyson lay sprawled on the tattered blanket, his gaunt frame a grotesque silhouette of ribs and sinew, his matted coat a crusty shroud of dirt and despair. His eyes, hollow and unseeing, stared into the void, as if braced for an executioner's blade. Emily rose from her chair, coffee cold and forgotten in her grip, her gaze sharpening with fierce resolve. "We're bathing him today, Jake," she declared, her voice low but unyielding. "Those wounds, if we don't act, they'll kill him." Jake, bleary-eyed and reluctant, rubbed his face, his shoulders slumping as if dragged into a nightmare he couldn't escape. "Bathe him? That trembling wreck? He can barely stand." But Emily's eyes blazed. Unswayed, she knelt beside Tyson, her fingers brushing his filthy fur, tracing the hidden scars that whispered of horrors too dark to name. "He doesn't get a vote," she hissed, her words sharp as a blade. "He needs us, now." They moved with the precision of hunters stalking wounded prey, Jake looping a leash around Tyson's neck with a gentleness that belied the steel in his grip. The dog flinched, a guttural whine tearing free. A sound so raw it stabbed at Emily's chest. "Easy, Tyson. No one's hurting you," she murmured, though her hands shook as she urged him upright. His legs wobbled, frail as twigs in a tempest. Yet he stood, a fragile defiance against collapse. Jake tugged the leash, guiding him to the bathroom, each faltering step a muted thunderclap in the oppressive silence. The faucet roared to life, warm water gushing forth like a relentless tide. And as it struck Tyson's coat, he jolted as if electrocuted, a piercing yelp erupting, a cry from some buried abyss of terror. Emily and Jake froze, breath held hostage, their eyes locking in a shared flash of dread. They'd unwittingly unearthed a phantom pain. "Keep going," Emily rasped, clutching the sprayer, water cascading down in torrents, peeling away layers of grime to reveal angry, crimson scars etched into his flesh. Jake gritted his teeth, working shampoo into the fur with hands that moved like a surgeon's. Deliberate and cautious, fearing the slightest misstep might shatter the dog entirely. Then, against all odds, Tyson exhaled, a deep, shuddering breath, a release of some ancient burden. His gaze softened, the haunted depths giving way to a flicker of calm, almost gratitude. As the final rinse sluiced away, he took a tentative step, pressing his nose to Jake's hand, a fleeting touch, but a spark of trust igniting in the gloom, a promise of something new. The bathroom was a tomb of silence, broken only by the faint drip-drip of water from the faucet. A mournful rhythm echoing in the stillness. Tyson stood there, a drenched skeleton of a dog, his sodden fur clinging to his emaciated frame, ribs jutting out like the jagged edges of a broken blade. Steam swirled upward, cloaking the room in a ghostly haze. Yet it couldn't mask the raw intensity of Tyson's eyes, twin chasms of terror and suspicion, flickering as if awaiting an inevitable strike from the shadows. Emily knelt close, her trembling hands wielding a towel with the care of a healer tending a dying flame, brushing it gently across his back. "You did so well, Tyson," she whispered, her voice cracking, a fragile thread stretched taut over an abyss of emotion. Jake loomed a few feet away, clutching another towel like a shield, his gaze locked on Tyson as though watching a storm about to unleash its fury. "Feeling better, bud?" he rasped, his tone rough with the strain he tried to bury. Tyson's ears twitched, his breathing still ragged, but then, in a heartbeat that seemed to halt the world, he tilted his head, his cold nose brushing Jake's knee. It was a fleeting touch, soft as a whisper, yet it struck Jake like lightning, freezing him in place, his breath snagging in his chest. Emily's head snapped up, her eyes widening as tears spilled silently down her cheeks. Not from sorrow, but from the faint glimmer igniting in Tyson's stare, a spark of trust. Delicate as a candle flame in a gale. Jake extended his hand slowly, palm upturned and low, an offering laid bare in the quiet. Tyson hesitated, his nose twitching, his frail legs quaking as if the floor might crumble beneath him. But then he leaned forward, letting Jake's fingers rest against his damp fur. A soft gasp slipped from Emily's lips, her heart pounding like a drum in a war march. "He's choosing us, Jake," she breathed, her voice trembling with awe. Tyson didn't wag his tail, his body still taut as a bowstring, but he held his ground, a tiny victory. A chasm crossed in a single step. Emily swiped at her tears, rising to fetch a fresh blanket and spreading it near the couch. "This is yours, Tyson," she said, her words warm as a hearth's glow. Jake guided him from the bathroom, and this time Tyson walked, unforced, unburdened, each shaky step a quiet rebellion against his past. As he sank onto the blanket, he let out a long, shuddering sigh, a release of centuries of anguish. His eyes fluttered half-closed, no longer hollow pits of despair, but windows to a rare, tentative peace. Emily joined Jake on the couch, their silence a shared vigil as Tyson slipped into his first untroubled sleep. The road ahead loomed long and uncertain, but in that moment, bathed in the room's gentle light, Tyson was no longer a fugitive. He'd found a fragile harbor to call home. The morning sun clawed through the window, casting fiery streaks across the floor like molten gold spilling from a forge. Banishing the last remnants of night's shadow, Tyson lay curled on his blanket, a frail figure now softened by an unearthly calm. his damp fur glistening faintly from the previous night's ordeal. His half-closed eyes no longer hollow pits but mirrors of a tentative peace. Emily sat frozen at the kitchen table, her untouched coffee a cold relic in her hands, her stare fixed on Tyson as if he were a phantom that might dissolve if she dared look away. A shiver ran through her, not of relief, but of a bone-deep premonition that their lives had veered onto a path from which there was no return. Jake shuffled in, his eyes bloodshot from a sleepless night, gripping his phone like a soldier clutching a weapon after battle. "I checked again," he said, his voice a low rumble, heavy with the weight of discovery. "No missing dog reports, no flyers, nothing. Tyson's a ghost, no one's coming for him." His words landed like shards of ice, sharp and unforgiving. Emily's head snapped toward him, her lips pressing into a thin line, a spark of defiance igniting in her chest. "No one's coming?" she echoed, her voice trembling with a mix of fury and sorrow. "Look at him, Jake. Someone abandoned him, or worse, someone broke him." Her hand thrust toward Tyson, the faint scars beneath his fur glaring like silent screams etched into his flesh. Jake exhaled hard, sinking into the chair beside her, his gaze wavering between doubt and a resolve hardening like steel in a fire. "If we take him in, he murmured, his tone hushed as if the walls might betray them. "We've got to do it right. He doesn't just need a roof or a bowl of kibble. He needs a life where a raised hand doesn't mean pain." Emily nodded, her pulse hammering like a war drum, not from fear now, but from a vow taking root deep within her soul. She rose and approached Tyson, kneeling with a reverence that felt sacred, as if this moment balanced on a knife's edge. "Hey, bud, what do you say to staying with us?" she whispered, her voice a warm breeze cutting through a storm. Tyson stirred, his ears twitching, then slowly blinked open his deep brown eyes, a flicker of confusion passing through them, as if he'd forgotten what safety felt like. Then, in a quiet miracle, he stretched out his front legs, letting out a long, shuddering breath that seemed to carry away a lifetime of torment. Emily extended her hand, palm up, and Tyson, for the first time, pressed his nose into it. A deliberate, steady touch. Jake let out a soft, startled laugh, the sound a beacon piercing the gloom. "That's a yes if I ever saw one," he said, his eyes alight with a rare, unguarded joy. Tears welled in Emily's eyes, but she grinned, her fingers brushing behind Tyson's ears. For the first time, his tail gave a faint, hesitant wag, slow, uncertain, but a bold declaration of belonging. Tyson was no longer a fugitive, no longer a lost specter, he was theirs. And they were his. In that small room awash with light, a new chapter unfurled, not just for Tyson, but for Emily and Jake, who had unknowingly reclaimed a piece of themselves in the act of saving him. Thank you for accompanying us in today's story. See you again in the next videos. Hello and see you again. Thank you for accompanying us in today's story. See you again in the next videos. Hello and see you again.